This is a Fox News alert. I'm Bret Baier in Washington. You are looking live right now at pictures from the UK, where workers are counting votes in an election that may send shockwaves across the globe. Early numbers from parliamentary balloting suggest a major upset in the making there and a possible loss of the majority in Parliament for Prime Minister Theresa May's Conservative Party. The British pound has already fallen in reaction to the exit polls that are suggesting the Conservatives are doing much worse than expected. We'll have a live report from London shortly, but first the breaking political news here in the U.S. Former FBI Director James Comey says he wrote his now famous memos about his meetings with President Trump because he was afraid the president might lie about those private meetings. He also reiterated what was released yesterday, that he says the president did not ask him to drop the Russia investigation. Comey's much anticipated testimony before the Senate Intelligence Committee was front page news and must-see TV today. Whether it lived up to expectations really depends on your perspective. We'll look at all of that from all angles tonight. We have Fox team coverage. John Roberts at the White House with what the president's camp is saying tonight. Media analyst Howard Kurtz tells us how the press is faring in all of this. But we start off with Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge, who was in the hearing today on Capitol Hill. Good evening, Catherine.
But James Comey testified that he needed the memos because he couldn't trust the president.
I was honestly concerned that he might lie about the nature of our meeting, and so I thought it really important to document.
The senior Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee wanted more information on the first encounter with the incoming president.
What was it about that meeting that led you to determine that you needed to start putting down a written record?
The circumstances, the subject matter, and the person I was interacting with. Circumstances first, I was alone with the President of the United States, or the President-elect, soon to be President.
The fired FBI director told the Senate panel the White House was not straight with him.
The shifting explanations confused me and increasingly concerned me. They confused me because the president and I had had multiple conversations about my job, both before and after he took office.
Publicly, the White House said James Comey was fired over his handling of the Hillary Clinton email investigation and a loss of confidence at the FBI. But the former director said otherwise about the president's motives.
I was fired because of something about the way I was conducting the Russia investigation was in some way putting pressure on him.
Comey documented his conversations with the president, including a February meeting where he alleged the president told him to let go of the federal probe into former National Security Advisor Mike Flynn.
At the time, did you say anything to the president about that is not an appropriate request?
I didn't, no.
Okay. Why?
I think the circumstances were such that I was a bit stunned and didn't have the presence of mind.
After a media report that the president asked Comey for a pledge of loyalty, Mr. Trump tweeted about possible tapes of their conversation, setting into motion a chain of events that led to the special counsel appointment.
And look, I've seen the tweet about tapes. Lordy, I hope there are tapes.
Comey decided it was up to him to set the record straight.
So I asked a friend of mine to share the content of the memo with a reporter. Didn't do it myself for a variety of reasons, but I asked him to because I thought that might prompt the appointment of a special counsel.
Members of both parties questioned Comey's actions.
So you didn't consider your memo or your sense of that conversation to be a government document. You considered it to be somehow your own personal document that you could share with the media as you wanted to?
I understood this to be my recollection recorded of my conversation with the president. As a private citizen, I felt free to share that. I thought it very important to get it out.
A lot of this comes down to who should we believe. Do you want to say anything as to why we should believe you?
I've tried to be open and fair and transparent and accurate.
On whether President Trump's statement about Flynn amounted to a crime, Comey testified it was up to the special counsel.
Do you know of any case where a person has been charged for obstruction of justice, or for that matter, any other criminal offense, where they said or thought they hoped for an outcome?
I took it as a direction.
Right.
I mean, this is the President of the United States, with me alone, saying, I hope this. I took it as, this is what he wants me to do. Now, I didn't obey that, but that's the way I took it.
As the Senate Intelligence Committee hearing unfolded, so did other headlines.
Did the president at any time ask you to stop the FBI investigation into Russian involvement in the 2016 U.S. elections?
Not to my understanding, no.
and for Comey's old boss, Attorney General Loretta Lynch. Comey testified that she instructed him to use language that downplayed the FBI's probe of Hillary Clinton's emails and that was similar to the language used by Clinton's campaign.
At one point, the Attorney General had directed me not to call it an investigation, but instead to call it a matter, which confused me and concerned me.
On Russia's interference in the U.S. election, Comey testified that it was done with purpose, with sophistication, and that it came from the very top, Bret.
Catherine Harris, live on the Hill. Catherine, thank you. So far, we have not directly heard from the president on Comey's testimony, but we did hear from the president's personal attorney. It's safe to say the Trump team is trying to accentuate the positive and hammer Comey on the negative. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts has that part of the story tonight from the North Lawn. Good evening, John.
Brett, good evening to you. The White House and the Republican Party are trying to put the best spin possible on today's hearing, insisting that Comey's testimony proves the president did nothing wrong and that it's, quote, time for this witch hunt to end. The image Donald Trump wanted to present today was that of a president unconcerned by the machinations on Capitol Hill, speaking today to the Faith and Freedom Coalition.
You didn't let me down, and I will never, ever let you down. You know that.
It was left to the president's outside attorney, Mark Kasowitz, to respond to James Comey's testimony.
Mr. Comey has now finally confirmed publicly what he repeatedly told President Trump privately. That is, that the president was not under investigation as part of any probe into Russian interference.
While Kasowitz claimed vindication on that point, the president's team took issue with Comey's assertion that the president was subtly ordering him to drop the investigation into Michael Flynn.
The president never, in form or substance, directed or suggested that Mr. Comey stop investigating anyone, including the president never suggested that Mr. Comey, quote, let Flynn go.
President Trump's son, Don Jr., backed up his father, saying he doesn't do subtle. On Twitter, writing, quote, knowing my father for 39 years, when he orders or tells you to do something, there is no ambiguity. You will know exactly what he means. On Comey's assertion that the president was asking him for a pledge of loyalty, Kasowitz insisted didn't happen.
The president also never told Mr. Comey, quote, I need loyalty. I expect loyalty, close quote. He never said it in form, and he never said it in substance.
While the bulk of the response came from the president's personal attorney, the White House did weigh in on Comey's assertion that the president lied about the director's firing.
The administration then chose to defame me and, more importantly, the FBI by saying that the organization was in disarray, that it was poorly led, that the workforce had lost confidence in its leader. Those were lies, plain and simple.
In an off-camera briefing, the principal deputy secretary rejected that charge.
No, I can definitively say the president's not a liar, and I think it's frankly insulting that that question would be asked.
The president's team also came down hard on Comey's revelation that he leaked the details of the February 14th Oval Office meeting in order to prompt the appointment of a special counsel. Kasowitz claimed the action amounted to retaliation against the president.
We will leave it to the appropriate authorities to determine whether these leaks should be investigated along with all the others that are being investigated.
The president's legal team also charges that Comey began to leak the contents of his memo before the president sent out the tweet that Comey said today caused him to leak the contents and the details of that meeting that the two of them had in the Oval Office. In fact, the day before the president sent out that tweet, the New York Times carried a story that had details of the private dinner between Comey and the president, details that were memorialized in one of Comey's now famous memos. Bret?
John Roberts live on the North Lawn. John, thank you. In fact, a lot of talk about the media during today's hearing, and the media took a pounding. Fox News media analyst and the host of Fox's Media Buzz, Howie Kurtz, has a look at that.
President Trump wasn't the only target for James Comey at today's Senate hearing. He also took direct aim at the press. The former FBI chief was especially critical of a New York Times story from February headline, Trump campaign aides had repeated contacts with Russian intelligence.
And so the American people can understand this. That report by the New York Times was not true. Is that a fair statement?
in the main, it was not true.
Comey did not specify what was untrue about the Times article, but said many media reports are off the mark. And that's because, in his view, most sources cited by journalists are uninformed.
And I'm not picking on reporters about writing stories about classified information, is the people talking about it often don't really know what's going on. And those of us who actually know what's going on are not talking about it.
And he soon broadened his indictment of the press.
You were stunned about how wrong they got the facts.
Yes, there have been many, many stories purportedly based on classified information about lots of stuff, but especially about Russia, that are just dead wrong.
But Comey says the FBI doesn't call the press to correct inaccurate stories. His testimony also knocked down reports on CNN, as well as ABC, that Comey would say today that he never told the president he was not under investigation as part of the Russia probe, as Mr. Trump had insisted.
He will say that he never assured Donald Trump that he was not under investigation, that would have been improper for him to do so.
But Comey did confirm he had given the president such assurances 3 times. That prompted CNN to correct an online story headline Comey expected to refute Trump. Yet Comey admitted orchestrating his own leak to the New York Times, which reported last month that the president had asked him to, quote, shut down the investigation of former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. The story had quotes from Comey's version of the conversation, including the president telling him, "I hope you can let this go," which a Comey friend at Columbia Law School read to the paper.
So why didn't you give those to somebody yourself rather than give them through a third party?
Because I was worried the media was camping at the end of my driveway at that point, and I was actually going out of town with my wife to hide, and I worried it would be like feeding seagulls at the beach if it was I who gave it to the media. So I asked my friend, make sure this gets out.
All this put Comey in the position of criticizing leaked stories as inaccurate while confessing that he's been a high-level leaker himself. Now, New York Times spokeswoman just told me that the papers found no evidence its story was inaccurate, but would welcome any details from Comey or the FBI. Still, there's no question the media's reputation took a hit at the hearing that all the broadcast and cable news networks carried live. Bret?
Howie, thank you. Let's get some analysis now and reaction from the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, California Congressman Adam Schiff. Congressman, thanks for the time. Your assessment of today's hearing.
Well, you know, I found it quite stunning. It's not every day you have a former director of the FBI saying that he couldn't trust the president, that the president had demanded loyalty from him in a conversation that at least in part centered around whether the director would keep his job, and most significantly, that he was asked to drop a criminal case involving a very high-profile surrogate of the president on the campaign trail, but more importantly, the National Security Advisor of the United States. So pretty stunning in many respects.
I want to take a listen to some of the questioning, specific issues that you just mentioned there today.
Did the president at any time ask you to stop the FBI investigation into Russian involvement in the 2016 U.S. elections?
Not to my understanding, no.
Did any individual working for this administration, including the Justice Department, ask you to stop the Russian investigation?
No.
This is the president speaking. I hope you can see your way clear to letting this go, to letting Flynn go. You don't know of anyone that's ever been charged for hoping something. Is that a fair statement?
I don't, as I sit here.
Why didn't you stop and say, Mr. President, this is wrong? I cannot discuss this with you.
It's a great question.
Did you tell the White House counsel that is not an appropriate request? Someone needs to go tell the president that he can't do these things?
I didn't, no.
Why?
In the moment, it didn't come to my mind.
Congressman, do you think there's an obstruction of justice case here?
You know, I think there's certainly evidence that was presented in his testimony that the president may have sought to interfere or obstruct the investigation. You know, there's obviously a question about whether there's sufficient evidence of that. But if we were prosecuting a case of obstruction, his entire testimony would come in. I don't think there's a judge in the land that would find it wasn't relevant evidence that goes to obstruction. I think one of the most powerful points the director made today is the president each time cleared the room, including cleared the room of the Attorney General. Why would you do that unless you were conscious that what you were about to do was wrong? So I do think we need to corroborate the director's testimony. We ought to find out whether the president also asked other directors to weigh in with Director Comey to drop the Flynn case. I think we ought to obviously examine those contemporaneous memoranda, as well as talk to people in the FBI who worked with Director Comey, some of which were present while he was on the telephone with the president.
So he was also asked, Comey was, whether he thought he would be FBI director today had he not been fired. He said yes. What about the questioning from Dianne Feinstein and Marco Rubio and others about his reaction? Should he have believed that there was, in fact, obstruction of justice, and his reaction to it?
I think those were perfectly appropriate questions, as was the question, if this is wrong, why didn't you confront the president? And, of course, his answer was that he was stunned, but nonetheless, I think it's fair to ask, after you got over the shock of what the president said, why wasn't this raised with other people at the Justice Department? If you didn't feel you could go to the Attorney General, why not go to the acting Deputy Attorney General? I think those are all perfectly fair questions, and people can evaluate whether he took the right steps or not. But I do think that that the underlying facts he outlined of what took place seem very credible to me.
Legal analyst and law professor Jonathan Turley wrote this: "It is certainly true that if Trump made these comments, his conduct is wildly inappropriate. However, talking like Tony Soprano does not make you Tony Soprano." It is similar to the argument that the House Speaker made today about the president's style as a New York real estate developer and not used to the inner workings of Washington. Do you buy that?
I don't buy that. You can't hold this president to a different ethical standard that you would hold others to. And again, you know, the fact that he dismisses other people from the room shows to me a consciousness that what he is doing is wrong. But more than that, this isn't just about how the president talks. If the president was trying to get the director of the FBI to drop a criminal case involving someone very close to the president, that is serious business, and I don't think it's just a rhetorical question.
Was it appropriate for the FBI director, former FBI director, to leak the contents of those memos of the private meetings with the president to a friend to be leaked to the media?
I think if the director was as concerned as he evidently was that either this evidence might not be preserved or that the true story ought to get out, I think the director should have come to the public directly himself or come to Congress and made those statements and clarified the record and not gone through a third party. So that's what I think the director should have done.
Speaking of the media, he says there have been many stories based on classified information purportedly. Lots of stuff, but especially about Russia, that are just dead wrong. Congressman, you've cited a lot of stories with anonymous sourcing. The former FBI director is saying a lot of that is dead wrong. What do you think of that?
You know, certainly some of the stories are wrong. Indeed, as you know, some of the stories on Fox about the British being participants in surveillance of President Trump were wrong. That doesn't excuse the president's conduct here. We do need to get to the bottom of what allegations that are aired in public in these stories are true and what are not true. But yes, certainly there has been press reporting that has been erroneous. At times there's been press reporting that has been all too accurate. I will say this, though. Any reporting that reveals sources and methods, anyone that is disclosing sources and methods, that's a real problem.
Fox News Division, by the way, never backed up that British report. Let me just ask you a couple more things. One is there was talk today and questioning about the former Attorney General Loretta Lynch meeting with the former President Bill Clinton on that tarmac in Arizona. And here is some of that in the questioning.
Was your decision influenced by the Attorney General's tarmac meeting with the former President Bill Clinton?
Yes, in a ultimately conclusive way.
Were there other things that contributed to that you can describe in an open session?
At one point, the Attorney General had directed me not to call it an investigation, but instead to call it a matter, which confused me and concerned me. It gave the impression that the Attorney General was looking to align the way we talked about our work with the way a political campaign was describing the same activity, which was inaccurate. We had a criminal investigation open.
So, Congressman, for all the talk about political influence in this Russia investigation from allegedly the Trump administration, Director Comey is making a direct charge here that then Attorney General Loretta Lynch was politically active in how he was supposed to characterize that investigation. Your thoughts?
Well, yes. I think Director Comey did shed additional light on how the Justice Department was viewing or handling or talking about the Clinton investigation. What was most significant to me about that, though, apart from knowing more about the historical record, is what light it shed on Director Comey. And Director Comey there, I think, acknowledged that he agreed to use a different word to talk about a matter rather than investigation, something he was uncomfortable with. I think in evaluating the credibility of a witness, you look at something like that when someone admits they did something they're not proud of, and that enhances the credibility of the rest of their testimony, at least in my view.
Congressman Schiff, we appreciate your time. You're always welcome back.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. You're looking live at the UK as workers count the votes to tell us what happened in today's parliamentary elections. The exit polls there are in, and it looks like a major upset in the making. This has world implications. We will go live to London after the break. This is a Fox News Alert. Votes are being counted right now in the UK, where polls closed about an hour ago. There could be some big surprises today. The election began as a way to get more support for the Brexit, England leaving the European Union, Britain leaving the European Union, but ended as a referendum, really, on the Prime Minister's terrorism policies. Senior Foreign Affairs correspondent Greg Palcott is live in London tonight. Surprising. Greg, good evening.
Bret, some surprises indeed. The votes are being tallied, but according to our sister network Sky News and other broadcasters, while the Conservative Party, Prime Minister Theresa May, could end up being again the biggest party in the next Parliament, they could be short of a majority, and that is a big shock for the Prime Minister and a boost for the left-wing Labour Party and its leader, Jeremy Corbyn. While they will be trailing the Conservatives, they still did much better than expected, as the UK faces some very important issues.
Britain must negotiate in the coming years an exit or Brexit from the European Union. It will be a daunting task, with the UK hoping to maintain access to the European market while cutting immigration and keeping the price of the divorce down. Britain also must deal with a growing threat from Islamist terror. 3 deadly attacks in less than 3 months, including 2 right here in London, underscoring the danger. A tightening in anti-terror laws and a rebuilding of the police force has been called for. And finally, after years of austerity, a host of domestic problems face the UK, from socialized medicine not up to the task, infrastructure that's lacking, and a widening inequality gap.
In fact, the Labour Party hit hard on those domestic issues. This country has been hit hard by austerity cuts. But again, they could be down to campaign stumbles by Prime Minister Theresa May. And these early results, these early projections, we should say, not great news for the White House. Prime Minister May has been overall friendly with President Trump. In this time of shaky relations with Europe, Washington could need all the friends that it could get. We have to underscore, this is just an exit poll. The Conservatives could still gain their majority in a new parliament, or they could form a coalition with other parties. But they could also face what is dreaded here in the UK, what is called a hung parliament. That is, no majority at all. It's going to be a long night and maybe some long days. Back to you, Brett.
Greg, very quickly, I've seen some reporting out of the UK, people referencing President Trump's tweet and tweets with the London mayor and the back and forth, that somehow that energized the left. Is that the feeling there?
That has been a controversial point, Brett. I must say the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn and others picked up on that. Prime Minister May kept a bit of a distance from that. At the end of the day, we will see whether that played any kind of role at all. But again, a very tight match is looking right like tonight.
Okay. Greg Palcott live in London. We will track this throughout the night. And again, we're live at midnight with all the results. The woman charged back here in the U.S. with leaking national security secrets to the news media was in federal court a short time ago. Correspondent Jonathan Seri shows us what happened tonight from Augusta, Georgia. Good evening, Jonathan.
Hi, Brett. This story is unfolding as we speak. The hearing is still going on. They did take a 15-minute break, but once court resumes, we anticipate that the federal judge will determine whether Reality Winner will be granted bond or whether she must remain in jail until her trial, which will be scheduled at a later date. She arrived in the courtroom wearing an orange jumpsuit. Her hands were cuffed behind her back. Her legs were in shackles, although after she was seated, bailiffs released her hands and she was taken taking copious notes throughout the entire hearing. She pled not guilty to the federal government's allegation that she revealed government documents to an online news source. Meanwhile, investigators continue to examine the evidence that they uncovered during a search warrant of her home over the weekend. In that search warrant, they seized 2 computers, a tablet, several journals, among other items. And in that journal, prosecutors revealed some of the quotes from that journal in which Winner allegedly said, quote, "I want to burn the White House down." Went on to name Osama bin Laden and several other Taliban leaders, also saying that she wanted to live somewhere other than the USA, listing several countries and regions, including Kurdistan, Nepal, Afghanistan, and Mexico. They also read several quotes from transcripts of phone conversations that she had with family members once she was incarcerated. She allegedly told her sister, "I'm going to play that card being pretty, white, and cute." And in another jailhouse conversation with her mother, she allegedly said, "If I don't get out, go nuclear with the press, because that is the way Manning got out," an obvious reference to Chelsea Manning. Of course, defense attorneys called family members and a friend who described her as a highly intelligent young woman who turned down a full college scholarship to join the Air Force and serve her country. Brett?
Sarah, live in Augusta. Jonathan, thank you. On the markets today, stocks were up. The Dow gained 9. The S&P 500 finished ahead 2/3. The Nasdaq jumped 24. Senior Pentagon officials say a U.S. aircraft shot down a drone belonging to pro-Syrian forces after that drone fired on coalition personnel today on the ground in Syria. No one was injured, we're told. Earlier in the day, Allied forces destroyed 2 pro-regime vehicles advancing toward coalition troops in Syria. We're getting reaction tonight to North Korea's latest missile tests. They came on the same day South Korea's new president suspended installation of new U.S.-provided anti-missile defenses. Correspondent Kristen Fisher is watching all of it tonight from the Pentagon.
When North Korea launched several surface-to-ship missiles about 24 hours ago, they landed in the same waters where, earlier this week, 2 U.S. aircraft carriers were conducting joint military exercises with the South Korean Navy. South Korean military leaders are saying the North likely wanted to show off its ability to precisely hit a large warship, while the country's new president is issuing this warning to his northern counterpart.
Our government, as I have already clarified multiple times, will not back off at all or compromise regarding national security and people's safety.
This latest launch was the 4th missile test by North Korea since South Korean President Moon Jae took office less than a month ago. He's been outspoken about his willingness to achieve denuclearization through both dialogue and diplomacy. He also pulled the plug on the full deployment of a crucial U.S. missile defense system just hours before this latest missile test took place. Today, the State Department spokeswoman said Pyongyang's most recent provocations prove why the Trump administration believes the THAAD missile defense system is so vital.
Something along the lines of THAAD is something that's important to not only protect U.S. forces, to protect our alliance, and also to protect, help to further strengthen the region.
The move to suspend the deployment of THAAD, which had only become operational last month, is now being applauded by China and criticized on Capitol Hill.
It's obviously a blow to our national security interests, but larger than that, I think what it means is South Korea is not sure of the United States' commitment to their collective security. And it's part of, I think, a result of President Trump's foreign policy of America first.
Now today, the State Department spokeswoman declined to say if the Trump administration was disappointed by South Korea's decision, but both the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense met today to talk about it. Bret?
Kristen Fisher live at the Pentagon. Kristen, thank you. Iran's intelligence minister says 5 of the men who carried out yesterday's terrorist attacks in Tehran had previously fought for the Islamic State group. 17 people died and more than 40 were wounded in assaults on Parliament and the tomb of Iran's revolutionary leader. The White House issued a statement condemning the attacks, but implying that Iran itself is a major sponsor of terrorism. Iran's foreign minister called that statement repugnant. Qatar's top diplomat is striking a defiant tone tonight, saying no one gave Arab nations the right to blockade his energy-rich country. Qatar's foreign minister says the campaign by Saudi Arabia and its allies to isolate his country is based on what he calls false and fabricated news. He says Qatar has the right to support groups like the Muslim Brotherhood, despite its neighbors outlawing the Sunni Islamist group. President Trump has offered to host Arab leaders at the White House to try to resolve the crisis. Early word that Qatar may turn that down. We'll follow up. Up next, the panel dissects what we heard today, a lot of it, in the James Comey hearing in the Senate. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 29 in Philadelphia, as jurors in the Bill Cosby sexual assault trial are read statements from a police interview conducted 12 years ago. Cosby acknowledges fondling Andrea Constand after giving her what he said were cold and allergy pills to help her relax. At the time, prosecutors did not press charges. Constand is one of about 60 women who say Cosby sexually violated them, but her case is the only one resulting in a criminal charge. Fox Montana with another apology from newly elected Republican Congressman Greg Gianforte for attacking a reporter last month. Ben Jacobs of The Guardian has accepted that apology and agreed not to sue. Gianforte will pay $50,000 to a journalism advocacy organization. He's expected to plead no contest to the assault charge. And this is a live look at Atlanta from our affiliate, Fox 5. The big story there tonight. Officials say a deadly street drug made to look like Percocet is a mix of two synthetic opioids, one of which is consistent with a new substance similar to fentanyl. The drug is linked to 4 deaths and more than a dozen hospitalizations. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.
The administration then chose to defame me and, more importantly, the FBI by saying that the organization was in disarray, that it was poorly led, that the workforce had lost confidence in its leader. Those were lies, plain and simple.
In his interview with Lester Holt on NBC, the president said, I had dinner with him. He wanted to have dinner because he wanted to stay on. Is this an accurate statement?
No, sir.
The president was asked whether he had urged you to shut down the investigation into Michael Flynn. The president responded, quote, no, no. Next question. Is that an accurate statement?
I don't believe it is.
The president never suggested that Mr. Comey, quote, let Flynn go, close quote. The president also never told Mr. Comey, quote, I need loyalty. I expect loyalty, close quote.
The president's personal attorney there reacting to 2.5 hours of testimony before the Senate Intelligence Committee today. Let's bring in our panel. Charles Hurt, opinion editor for The Washington Times. A.B. Stoddard, associate editor at Real Clear Politics, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Okay, Charlie, your overall assessment.
I don't really know how anybody could come out of this without thinking that it was a good day for the president. You know, there are a lot of things that are still sort of being disputed by the White House, but let's just assume that everything that Director Comey said is exactly what happened. It's clear that the president didn't obstruct justice. He isn't and wasn't under investigation for ties to Russia. And then the new things, you know, obviously there are some of the more unpleasant things that we already knew about, such as the pressure that it appears that he put on Comey in the White House, which obviously is not the way things work in Washington. But for no one is that a surprise. Donald Trump doesn't do things the way things are done in Washington. The only new things that came out was this sort of bombshell about Loretta Lynch that suggests that not only did she perhaps obstruct justice, she also tampered in the election. So I think that overall it has to be considered a victory for Donald Trump.
The other bombshell there was that I think caught even the senators by surprise who were asking the questions was that the former FBI director said he was a leaker. Take a listen to this questioning by Susan Collins and the answering.
The president tweeted on Friday, after I got fired, that I better hope there's not tapes. I woke up in the middle of the night on Monday night, because it didn't dawn on me originally, that there might be corroboration for our conversation. There might be a tape. And my judgment was I needed to get that out into the public square. And so I asked a friend of mine to share the content of the memo with a reporter. Didn't do it myself for a variety of reasons, but I asked him to because I thought that might prompt the appointment of a special counsel. And so I asked a close friend of mine to do it.
Who was that?
A good friend of mine who's a professor at Columbia Law School.
Well, that good friend was Daniel Richman, and he's a Columbia law professor, and he then leaked that information, AB, to the New York Times, which is where we got that story about the memos and the original Michael Flynn story. And that was surprising.
A proud leaker. I think we've known for a really long time that Comey has been actively leaking because there are a lot of sources familiar with Comey's thinking about every 36 hours. So I think he feels free to just say, this is what I did, and I did it for a reason. He said he did it hoping that it would lead to the appointment of a special counsel. And how did it start? With a tweet from Trump on Friday, talking about tapes that to this day we don't really think exist or that he'll ever share with us. So, I think that today was really a day. First of all, I think it's great that it's sort of the end of the Comey era. I think everyone's done with hearing from him. We've heard from him. It's over. We won't hear from him anymore. Comey is a political guy. He's kind of a slippery guy, and he's a confusing guy. And he did not have good answers to a lot of questions today. That said, this is going to be a time for discipline from this president that I don't know he's really up to executing. He was good to have his lawyer respond today and not live tweet the event, but the suggestion from James Comey today that actually Robert Mueller, the special counsel, could be looking into obstruction of justice will likely drive this president completely crazy. From the closed-door session, there's reporting that Attorney General Sessions had a third meeting with Sergei Kislyak, the Russian ambassador, that has been previously undisclosed. There will be more leaks. President Trump will remain nervous about these investigations. He's going to have to do everything in his power to control himself.
But I've been told privately, Charles, that one of the reasons they have the personal attorney and one of the reasons he made the statement was, in essence, to not have the president get engaged on Twitter and to have the personal attorney now take everything. And because he is forceful and in the New York style, that perhaps that meets the president's wishes.
But he wasn't a good advocate today. I don't think he presented a good case. And on a day where your press secretary says the president is not a liar, you've had a bad day. I don't think there's any way to read this. I don't think Comey had a good day for himself, but surely the president had a bad day. And it's that clip you showed at the beginning in which Angus King asked Comey, the president has said so-and-so, is it true? No. Is it true? No. Remember back in July, a similar thing happened in a congressional hearing where the Comey was asked about statements Hillary had made, one at a time. She said X about the emails. Right. Is that true? No. Is that true? That devastated her. And I think this sort of brings home the question of the president's credibility, which is always a big loss. I don't think Comey did himself any good for himself. He showed himself, I think he was credible, in part because he showed himself to be cowardly, caving into Loretta Lynch, characterizing the investigation into Hillary in a way that helped her campaign, that he knew was wrong, but he did it anyway, and not objecting. Look, here's a central question. If you thought this was obstruction of justice when Trump was asking you to drop the Flynn thing, why didn't you resign? Why didn't you even bring it up with the president or anybody in justice? I mean, this is a man, I don't know if cowardly is the right word, but he sure has post facto integrity.
He used those words himself, cowardly, didn't stand up. That line of questioning was not just Republicans. Senator Dianne Feinstein asked, why didn't you step up? You're a big man. Even though the Oval Office is intimidating, why didn't you get up and say this is not appropriate? He did not have an answer, Charlie. This is the exchange with the Idaho Republican, Jim Risch.
He did not direct you to let it go.
Not in his words, no.
He did not order you to let it go.
Again, those words are not an order. I took it as a direction.
Right.
I mean, this is the President of the United States with me alone saying, I hope this. I took it as this is what he wants me to do. Now, I didn't obey that, but that's the way I took it.
Do you know of any case where a person has been charged for obstruction of justice, or for that matter, any other criminal offense, where they said or thought they hoped for an outcome?
I don't know well enough to answer.
And he wouldn't make that determination, whether obstruction of justice can be made. But listening to those answers, it's a tough case.
Yeah, and if you talk to people that have made those cases before in the past, it's a very, very hard thing to prove, to win a case on, because among other things, you have to be able to prove that a crime was committed in obstructing justice. So that in a case like this, it would be something like bribery. But I think that the case, the complexity of all of this has a lot of people. Obviously it's catnip for the press, catnip for people that love politics. But for a lot of people, I think they're like, what is this all about? They don't care that much about it. And the fact that there are going to be no charges brought, I would argue, it amounts to nothing.
Well, that's the bottom line, AB, is that this is a political process. And you had the House Speaker Paul Ryan today saying we would not impeach a Democrat with this evidence, let alone a Republican, in a Republican House and a Republican Senate.
Right. Because the sitting president is not going to be indicted over this, the question is how much pressure it will come from the Congress, from his own party. He's not going to be impeached. The problem, as Charles raises, first of all, we actually don't know what we don't know. And we always have to come back to that, because every time there's a revelation in the press, we find out about things we didn't know.
However, he said many of the stories have been wrong, dead wrong. This is Comey.
Well, DNI Coates and Mike Rogers were brought before the committee the day before yesterday, and said basically they did not deny that he asked them the same thing.
No, they didn't want to talk about it in an open setting, actually.
But they did not say this never happened. And so what I mean by that is that we don't know what we don't know. There might have been other people.
Sound like Don Rumsfeld, but
we might have been other people. There might have been others that President Trump talked to about the Flynn investigation. Just let me finish. The point is that we don't know. We won't know until the end of the Mueller investigation. It could take a very long time. We don't know what we don't know. In the meantime, this is incredibly damaging to his credibility. No one believes him over James Comey. James Comey is going to disappear and doesn't matter anymore. The point is, and Charles is right, his lawyer came out today and tried to pretend that Comey's lying, and it's laughable on its face. Donald Trump lied to the press about what he said in the office about the Michael Flynn investigation. He has no credibility left. And that just long-term overseas with his political foes, with his political friends, even if he's not indicted or impeached, is a huge problem for his leadership.
We're not done. More with the panel when we come back.